November 1944. 30,000 feet above Germany, the sky is thick with American bombers. Hundreds of B-17s holding tight formation, their silver bodies cutting through the pale winter sun. P-51 Mustangs circle them, steady and alert, pilots scanning the horizon for the familiar threat. German fighters will come. They always do. The Americans are ready for the usual fight. Then something tears through the sky. There is no warning, no formation breaking in the distance.
You see that? What the hell was that?
Just a flash of polished metal moving faster than anything they have ever seen. It slices through the bomber stream in a single violent pass. One B-17 erupts into flames before anyone fully understands what happened. Radio chatter explodes in confusion. The aircraft does not move like anything familiar. It does not struggle for altitude or linger in a turn. It dominates the air, striking and vanishing in seconds. By the time the escort pilots react, it is already miles away. Faster, untouchable, gone. On the ground, inside a reinforced concrete facility, a German engineer listens carefully to the combat reports. He does not celebrate. He understands the significance of what just occurred. Years earlier, as a young physicist dissatisfied with the limits of piston-driven flight, he imagined something radically different. An aircraft powered by pure jet thrust, air drawn in, compressed, ignited, and expelled backward in controlled fury. Speed beyond mechanical constraints, a speed that would redefine air combat. Now that vision has taken shape in metal and fire. The aircraft is the Messerschmitt Me 262, the first operational jet fighter in history. And behind its revolutionary engine stands Hans von Ohain. But as the jet proves its terrifying potential in the skies above Europe, Germany itself is collapsing. Factories are burning under relentless bombing. Fuel reserves are dwindling. Front lines are breaking on every side.
The war is entering its final phase. The future has arrived. And it has arrived too late. Years before the war filled Europe's skies with bombers and fighters, a young German physicist was asking a question that few engineers had seriously considered. Why did aircraft still depend on propellers? By the early 1930s, aviation had made remarkable progress. Aircraft were faster, stronger, and capable of flying farther than ever before. But every airplane still relied on the same fundamental principle: a piston engine spinning a propeller through the air. To most engineers, that was simply how airplanes worked. But to Hans von Ohain, it looked like a limitation. As a physics student in Germany, he became fascinated with the idea of a completely different form of propulsion. Instead of using rotating blades to pull an aircraft forward, he imagined something far more direct. Air would enter the front of an engine. It would be compressed, mixed with fuel, ignited, and then expelled violently out the back. The result would be continuous thrust, pure jet propulsion. If it worked, it would completely change aviation. What von Ohain did not yet know was that, within only a few years, those sketches would lead to one of the most important technological revolutions of the 20th century. The birth of the jet age had begun quietly, on a student's desk, in a notebook filled with impossible ideas. To become real, the engine needed something much bigger: money, engineers, factories, and, above all, someone willing to believe in a radical new technology. That man appeared in 1936. His name was Ernst Heinkel. Heinkel was already one of Germany's most influential aircraft manufacturers. His company designed and built advanced aircraft for both civilian aviation and the rapidly expanding German Air Force. Unlike many engineers of the time, Heinkel was fascinated by experimental technology. He believed that the next generation of aircraft would not simply be faster versions of existing machines. They would be something entirely new. When von Ohain presented his concept for a jet engine, Heinkel immediately recognized its potential. Instead of dismissing the young physicist's idea as unrealistic, he did something extraordinary. He funded it. Inside Heinkel's factories, von Ohain suddenly had access to real engineers, machine tools, and laboratories capable of building the first practical jet engines. The work moved quickly. By 1937, the first experimental engines were already being assembled. But turning theory into reality proved far more difficult than the equations had suggested. Engines overheated, turbines failed, metal components warped under extreme temperatures. Sometimes the test engines simply exploded. But each failure brought new understanding. Slowly, piece by piece, the design improved. The impossible idea was becoming real. And within only 2 years, that engine would power an aircraft unlike anything the world had ever seen. The jet age was about to begin. Inside the factories of Ernst Heinkel, engineers began designing a small, experimental aircraft built specifically around the new engine. It would not use a propeller. It would rely entirely on jet propulsion. The aircraft was compact and unusual in appearance. Finally, on the morning of August 27, 1939, the small experimental aircraft rolled onto a runway at a German airfield. The aircraft was the Heinkel HE-178. A test pilot climbed into the cockpit. Mechanics stepped back. The aircraft began to move, faster, faster, until, suddenly, the wheels lifted from the ground. For the first time in human history, an aircraft was flying powered only by a jet engine. The flight lasted only a few minutes, but it proved something extraordinary. The future of aviation would not belong to propellers. The jet age had begun. But this historic flight happened at a moment when Europe was already sliding toward war. Within days of that first successful jet flight, Germany invaded Poland. The Second World War had begun. Suddenly, aviation technology was no longer about experimentation or engineering curiosity. It was about survival. The skies over Europe quickly filled with bombers, fighters, and deadly aerial battles. The responsibility for building this revolutionary aircraft went to the company of Willy Messerschmitt. His engineers began designing an aircraft unlike anything that had ever flown in combat. Instead of a propeller engine in the nose, the aircraft would carry 2 powerful jet engines mounted beneath its wings. The fuselage was sleek and narrow. The wings were slightly swept back. Everything about the design focused on one goal: speed. The aircraft would eventually receive a name that would become legendary in aviation history: the Messerschmitt Me 262. By 1943, the development of the jet aircraft was finally approaching operational readiness. After years of engineering struggles, prototype aircraft were proving that jet propulsion could completely transform air combat. And once in the air, it could simply outrun enemy aircraft. But during a meeting with aircraft designers and military officials, Adolf Hitler examined the new jet aircraft. He saw something different. Instead of seeing a revolutionary fighter, Hitler imagined a fast attack bomber, an aircraft that could strike enemy cities at incredible speed. And so, he issued an order. The new jet aircraft must be converted into a bomber, a blitz bomber. The demand created immediate problems for the engineers. Converting it into a bomber meant redesigning critical parts of the aircraft. The aircraft's balance and handling characteristics changed. Months of engineering work were suddenly redirected. By 1944, the first operational units of the Messerschmitt Me 262 finally began appearing in the skies over Europe. And when Allied pilots first encountered it, the reaction was immediate. For the bomber crews flying over Germany, the new jet fighter was terrifying. But the reality on the ground told a different story. Germany could build only a small number of the aircraft. Factories were constantly under Allied bombing. Fuel shortages were becoming severe, and many of the pilots assigned to the new jet fighters had little experience. The Me 262 was revolutionary, but it had arrived in a country that was already collapsing. On every front, Germany was losing the war. By the spring of 1945, the situation had become hopeless. Allied forces were advancing from the west. Soviet armies were closing in from the east, and the capital of the German Reich was under siege. The Berlin was falling. Factories that had once produced advanced aircraft were captured or destroyed. Airfields were abandoned. Jet fighters sat grounded without fuel. The revolutionary aircraft that had once promised to change the war had arrived far too late. Germany surrendered in May 1945. The Third Reich had collapsed. But the story of the jet engine was far from over. In the final days of the war, American intelligence teams began searching for German scientists. Their mission was clear: find the engineers behind the revolutionary technologies developed during the war: rockets, missiles, and jet engines. The operation became known as Operation Paperclip. Among the scientists discovered by Allied forces was Hans von Ohain. The physicist who had imagined jet propulsion as a young student was now part of a new geopolitical struggle: the Cold War. A scientist who had once worked for Nazi Germany would now help develop the future of aviation for its former enemy. Jet fighters became faster. Jet bombers flew across continents. Commercial airliners began crossing oceans. Within only a few decades, jet propulsion had completely transformed aviation. Ideas survive the systems that create them, but technology continues moving forward. It reshaped warfare. It transformed global travel. Germany lost the war, But the jet engine won the future. And the work of Hans von Ohain remains one of the most important breakthroughs in the history of aviation.
That's the end of this video. Would you like to see more of it? I hope so. Let me know in the comments.